But now we are entering our first theme of today, resilience and sustainable development, bioeconomy in the Arctic. This session is organized by the Finnish Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, and I am happy to invite Jaana Husu-Kallio, the Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, to chair the session. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the organizers of the conference in general. Yesterday was indeed a success, and everything, from the scientific point of view to the hospitality point of view, not to mention the discussions we have had during the breaks, including the evening, have been perfect. So it is a good way to continue our discussions today. So I welcome you all very cordially, and also every one of you behind the web streaming. That is indeed my great honor and pleasure on behalf of the ministry. So, resilience and sustainable bioeconomy. Really hot topics of today and also tomorrow. So we will start our session with the greetings of my Minister of Agriculture and Forestry, Jari Leppä, and unfortunately he's not here today, but well prepared with his video greetings. So after that I will invite the panelists who are the real experts from different views of the sustainable bioeconomy to take part in the morning session. So you are very cordially welcome, and we will start with the video greeting from my Minister.
Dear delegates, colleagues and friends, greeting from Helsinki. It's a great honor and pleasure to give this welcoming address to you all. Kuten hyvin tiedämme, Suomi on golfvirran ansiosta hyvin ainutlaatuinen arktinen maa. Suomi on pohjoisin maa, missä sekä metsä että maatalous ovat tärkeitä elinkeinoja. Näiden lisäksi muutkin arktisuuteen liittyvät elinkeinot, kuten matkailu, porotalous ja kalastus, ovat myös hyvin tärkeitä meille. Tällä hetkellä käynnissä olevat muutokset arktisilla alueilla johtuvat pääosin ulkoista tekijöistä. Ilmastonmuutos, globalisaatio, kaupungistuminen, luonnon monimuotoisuuden säilyttäminen ja maaseudun kehittäminen. Kaikki nämä vaikuttavat arktisiin alueisiin. Ilmastonmuutos etenee arktisella alueella nopeammin kuin missään muualla, ja sillä on perustavaa laatua olevia vaikutuksia alueen ihmisiin, ekosysteemeihin ja elinkeinoihin. Tämän vuoksi onkin huomattava, että ilmastokestävyys eli resilienssi on painopisteenä 3 viime vuosina hyväksytyssä kansainvälisessä sopimuksessa. Kestävän kehityksen tavoitteet ja Agenda 2030, Pariisin ilmastosopimus ja Sendaissa sovitut suuntaviivat katastrofiriskien vähentämiseksi. Nämä maailmanlaajuiset sopimukset ovat hyvin tärkeitä arktisten alueiden kannalta. Arktisen neuvoston nykyisenä puheenjohtajamaana Suomi on sitoutunut tekemään töitä ja kovasti töitä konkreettisen toimenpiteiden löytämiseksi, jolla voidaan parantaa arktisen alueen kestävyyttä ja kykyä sopeutua ilmastonmuutokseen. Olemme myös sisällyttäneet ohjelmaamme monia Yhdysvaltojen puheenjohtajuuskauden keskeisimpiä asioita, kuten koulutus ja resilienssi. Kestävyyden ja sille asetettujen tavoitteiden saavuttaminen arktisilla alueilla on haaste, johon voimme vastata yhteistyöllä eri osapuolten ja elinkeinojen kesken. Eri maankäyttötapojen yhteensovittamiseksi meidän on myös työskenneltävä yhdessä alkuperäiskansojen ja paikallisten asukkaiden kanssa. Hyvät osanottajat, tämän tilaisuuden pääteema on kestävä arktinen biotalous ja ilmastokestävyys. Arktisen alueen luonnonvarat ovat runsaat ja monipuoliset. Alueella on niin metsää, vesistöjä, kalaa kuin riistaakin. Kestävän arktisen biotalouden tulee perustua uusiutuvien luonnonvarojen vastuulliseen käyttöön, joka kunnioittaa alueen runsasta ja arvokasta, mutta haavoittuvaista luontoa. Alueeseen kohdistuu hyvin moninaisia odotuksia, minkä vuoksi arktisen alueen luonnon ja eri yhteisöjen ilmastokestävyyden vaaliminen on entistäkin tärkeämpää. Nyt tarvitsemme konkreettisia toimia, joilla edelleen vahvistetaan tietopohjaa ja osaamista. On tärkeää ymmärtää ympäristön muutos ja sen yhteys sosiaaliseen ja taloudelliseen kehitykseen. Meidän on myös kehitettävä välineitä, joilla arvioimme ilmasto- ja sääriskejä ja sopeudumme ilmastonmuutokseen. Jotta voimme voittaa nämä haasteet ja parantaa resilienssiä, tarvitaan lisää yhteistä kaikkien toimijoiden kesken, paikallista asukkaista ja elinkeinoista alueellisiin ja globaaleihin päättäjiin sekä tutkijoihin ja yrityksiin ja muihin sidosryhmiin. Tavoitteemme on ennen kaikkea arktisen alueen uusiutuvien luonnonvarojen kestävä ja vastuullinen käyttö. Ja tämän voimme saavuttaa yhdessä. Olen varma, että tämä konferenssi tarjoaa teille hyvin mielenkiintoisia esityksiä. Ja nyt on loistava tilaisuus keskustella kollegoiden ja muiden läsnäolijoiden kanssa arktiseen alueeseen liittyvistä moninaista kysymyksistä. Toivon, että viihdytte Rovaniemelle. Kiitoksia.
What about applause to the minister? I will forward the applause to him personally. I give my guarantees to that if he's not behind, the video to watch your reaction. Indeed, I think the minister made it quite clear what we are going to talk today about, and what we're going to do is to do it together, based, as we say, the basic slogan of the Finnish 100 years anniversary. Let's do it together. And that is why I'm asking the honorable panelists to come here together. I will introduce all of you one by one when it's your turn to take the podium and give a short introduction before we have the discussion together. So please come to take your seat. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So as we heard from my minister, that bioeconomy is not only should, but it has to be based on the responsibility and the responsible use of the natural resources. And what should be done and what has to be done is to do it together based on the latest scientific information with the cooperation of the local people and with the global view. I think that is the package of this morning, to have the different views on resilience and the sustainable bioeconomy. And therefore, these different approaches are handled by each of the speaker with their view based on their organization and their own expertise, to share the expertise with you and the experiences as well. And I think that what we are also requesting from them and from you as an audience, to get, as the minister said, also concrete steps how to manage the situation. Not only an horizontal overview, but also it's about what to do in practice. So what are the measures to improve the resilience in the Arctic area? Okay, so we will start, and I indeed have a great honor to introduce Ivonne Higuero first to take the floor as the Director of the Division of Forests, Land and Housing of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And I'm aware that this is not the first time in Rovaniemi for her. That is what she told me. The weather is very mild this time compared to your previous visit. Perhaps you will tell a little bit more about that as well. But she's very experienced in the area even before the current job, working for 20 years in UNEP in a very wide and broad range of natural resource management and environmental economic issues. So we have a global expert with us, and I'm very, very grateful, Yvonne, that you took your time to share your own views with us today. So the floor is now yours.
thank you very much, Jaana, for that great pronunciation of my name, first of all. Thank you for that, and for the good introduction. Yes, indeed, this is not my first time in Rovaniemi, but in fact it was -20. You may have heard of the Executive Secretary mention Metsä 2013. We were here in Rovaniemi and it was -20 at the time, so yes, quite frigid at that in December. Well, yes, indeed, my Executive Secretary mentioned the Rovaniemi Action Plan yesterday in her speech, and I will be referring to that today. Maybe a little bit of background information. We are at UNECE, yes, while I have global experience, right now at the Economic Commission for Europe, we focus on what we call the Pan-European region, which includes 56 member states, all over the European region, Central Asian countries, also the United States and Canada. And the work that we are doing in particular under the Rovaniemi Action Plan relates to forests. We have a forest committee, it's called the Committee on Forests and Forest Industry, where these 56 member states are gathered together to exchange best practices, lessons learned, to discuss policy on forests, and to find the way ahead, especially concerning sustainable development when it refers to forest. We have a very special situation with forests in the European region, which is very different from what is happening at the global level. In fact, forests are growing in the European region. Over the last 25 years, the growth has been quite high. We have now 1.89 billion hectares of forest in the European region, which is 42% of the forest in the global context. So this is quite a large coverage of forest in Europe. However, there have been some issues. While there are not many issues related to legal logging, we have some troubles in some particular areas of illegal logging. The trouble that we are encountering mostly lately is the issue of lowering the market demand for wood products and timber because of the recent financial crisis. So countries were concerned of how can we work better with forests, how can we do more with forests, not only looking at timber production, but looking in general at other issues of non-wood products as well from forests, and taking into account that loss of biodiversity continues, that climate change has negative impacts on forests. And at the same time, when the Rovaniemi Action Plan started being discussed, the development of the plan, it was the time of Rio +20 when green economy was being discussed. Now, of course, we're talking about bioeconomy here, but I feel that all of these are related to green economy. Of course, as when we talk about bioeconomy, we're talking about the dependence on natural resources for the economic development. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to point for changing or maybe just here. Okay, thank you. So here again in the dark above the dark map part of the map, we have the coverage of the what we call the ECE region. This Rovaniemi Action Plan covers the entire forest sector. So we're talking about all the functions of forest. As you know, we discuss often the multifunctionality of forest, which is not only about timber production, but many other services provided by forests. When we discuss ecosystem services, for example, there's the provisioning aspects of ecosystem services delivered by forests. There's the regulatory aspects delivered by forests. There's recreational services provided by forests. So this is all taken into account in the Rovaniemi Action Plan. And one of the areas in which, and one of the issues which we wanted to discuss more within the forest sector was how to make a larger contribution to the green economy. It was already felt when we discussed green economy that forests were already contributing to it to a certain extent, but it wasn't communicated properly, and we needed to communicate this better, that it's actually making a large contribution to the transition, what we call the transition to a green economy. Within the Rovaniemi Action Plan, it proposes 129 concrete actions under 5 pillars and identifies implementing actors. And what this means is that it wasn't an action plan which was a long list of, or a long wish list as sometimes we call it, but really identifying which actors could take part, who could participate in implementing this Rovaniemi Action Plan, and it covered all stakeholders. Yesterday there was a lot of discussion about including the private sector in sustainable development and in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, in the same way we were discussing, of course, when we talk about forest production, when we talk about forest products, including the private sector. An important aspect, and I think lately it's quite difficult to make any type of legally binding document that all countries can agree to. So more we are looking towards voluntary action plans, which are non-prescriptive, not saying that all countries have to do the same thing. It's a list of actions that could apply to different kinds of countries, and as you know, the region is quite diverse. There are different types of forests from north to south, so some may apply to some countries, some may not apply to other countries. So this is very important, identifying the actors and the countries who could participate in the different actions. Again, as I said, it's multi-stakeholder, addressed to governments, private sector, academia, they were all involved, and other national, international stakeholders, and open in terms of scope and participation. Everybody is welcome to participate, be it governmental, be it non-governmental. And as I mentioned, this was when the start of the discussions on green economy, what was Rio Plus 20, it was 2011 to 2013 that it was developed, so it took a little bit over 2 years. Now, I have actually brought with me the actual action plan. We should have copies available for you outside. It's a booklet like this that indicates what the action plan is and who the actors are, so you may be interested in taking a look at it. We're looking at 4 aspects within the plan, 4 pillars. It's actually, we call it 5 pillars, but one is cross-cutting. The policy development and monitoring is cross-cutting in all of the 4 pillars. And you can see here how really it focuses on the 3 pillars of sustainable development. When we talk about sustainable production and consumption of forest products, here we're talking about economy. In low carbon forest sector, we're talking about environment and impacts of emissions, the qualities of forests, of sequestering carbon, for example, how this can be taken advantage of when we work towards a green economy. When we look at people, we look at the social aspects. It's really people-centered as well, about quality of life and improving green jobs, what we call decent green jobs in the forest sector, and the long-term provision of forest ecosystem services. As I mentioned earlier, the ecosystem services provided by forests are many, and really there's a lack, in general, there's a lack of communication about these ecosystem services provided by forests, and also making and compensating for these ecosystem services that forests are providing. Here are some examples of actions. We couldn't, of course, address all of the actions that have taken place in this short time, but anybody who is interested can come to me and I can indicate where we show all the different actions that are taking place across the region. This is from national stakeholders. In this case, there are member states, and you can see that it ranges from forest certification, for example, forest standards in Turkey. In Russia, it focuses on legislation. There are some concerns about illegal logging in Russia, so they wanted to be able to trace roundwood and put a federal law in place in 2014. In Poland, for example, it was about ecosystem services, water retention in forests, and talking about resilience in this group, it also is trying to increase carbon absorption and avoid and protecting the land from natural disasters such as floods. And in Spain, there again, the social aspect of increasing green jobs in the forest sector and the demand for forest products. And again, here the concern that it should not only focus on timber production, but that portfolio should be more diverse, where there's other products, there's other services from the forest that should be communicated and focused on. In this slide, I show a few examples of what international stakeholders are doing. For example, ourselves, where we have to make decisions about the program of work. And again, as I mentioned, these 56 member states are participating in our Committee on Forest and Forest Industry, but we work together with the Food and Agricultural Organization in a joint section at the ECE. And every 2 years, and METSA 2013 was one of those joint sessions between the FAO European Forestry Commission and the ECE Committee on Forest and Forest Industry, where an integrated program of work is decided that lasts 4 years. And within this integrated program of work of 4 years, it's been many of the actions under the Rovaniemi Action Plan have been included. We have also teams of specialists where experts come from different governments, from also other stakeholders, as experts to be involved in the teams of specialists. They're working on sustainable forest management, on sustainable forest products, wood energy, as I mentioned before, in terms of low carbon economy, on green jobs in the forest sector, again, the social aspects of contribution of the forest sector to the green economy. Also, greening economies in Central Asia and the Caucasus is a project that we have been implementing thanks to the funding from the United Nations Development Account. Forest Europe, which is also a pan-European process dealing with forests, working with us on green jobs, including the ILO, the International Labor Organization, and UNEP. Under the Alpine Convention, the Mountain Forest Protocol is a contribution to the Rovaniemi Action Plan, and under circumboreal cooperation, also expanding, disseminating information about action plan for those countries to put in place. So as you can see, to wrap up, these are the different areas in which we are focusing on in the Rovaniemi Action Plan. And even though the Rovaniemi Action Plan was developed quite a few years, starting the development was quite a few years ahead of the adoption of the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, you can see how these can relate when we discuss climate mitigation and protection of ecosystems. Of course, we're dealing with SDG 13 on climate action, when we're and also in terms of life on land, including ecosystem services under SDG 15. When we discuss sustainably produced goods and services, of course, we're discussing sustainable, responsible consumption and production under SDG 12. Provision of ecosystem services, also life on land. Education and decent jobs. We're talking about Sustainable Development Goal 8 on decent work and economic growth. Of course, with water, sanitation, clean water, we're also discussing the ecosystem services from the forest, good health from the forest in terms of the recreational aspects of forest. So all of these functions are included. Very importantly, again, to address some of the questions about sustainable development and bioeconomy, what's important, what we found was very important, was to include all stakeholders in discussion, and it takes some time. We have to go through several consultations to be able to include their ideas, what they would like to do, especially when we look at the social aspects, especially when we look at the inclusion of the private sector. It's important to hear what their needs are and how to improve the quality of life of those forest communities. So in our view, it's very important to include them in all discussions about how to apply all of these commitments that are done at the international level. Very rarely reach down to the local levels where they have to implement these commitments. So this is a very good way of including others, of including society, civil society, non-governmental organizations, and private sector in the discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ivonne. Indeed, an excellent starting point for our discussion. And how nicely you started by saying that the forests are growing. That is something we know here in Finland. You know, if you want to have something as a feedback from this country, we are aware that the forests are growing, and that's important, of course, not only for Europe but globally. And sometimes we might be a little bit impatient, as you emphasized the importance of the communication and to get everyone of the stakeholders involved, that it takes time. And I remember from yesterday, you know, that I think in many of the panels it was a discussion, you know, that it's an urgent need to do something now. But at the same time, we need to have the patience for communication and to get everyone involved to implement the action plans that you introduced in a nice way indeed. But we will come back to that. So thank you very much indeed. And then we go on in the area of science, and I'm very pleased Suvi Sojamo is here from Aalto University. She's a researcher and works at the Water and Development Research Group. And I'm sure we're going to hear about the Finland project, which is founded by the Strategic Research Council of the Academy of Finland. So the floor is now yours. Please, Suvi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the Ministry for the kind invitation as well. And good morning, everyone, also from my behalf. As said, I'm Suvi Sojamo, and I work as a postdoctoral researcher at Aalto University in Helsinki, where I'm coordinating the Finland research project. Our approach to today's theme is via the water, energy, food nexus, which I will present to you shortly. First, a few words about our project. So Finland investigates future energy, food and water security in Finland. And as said, we are funded by the Academy of Finland Strategic Research Council program, Security in a Networked World. Even though our focus is on Finland, we also play and pay close attention to regional and global interlinkages, including those between and within the Arctic countries. We are a multidisciplinary consortium. We are 7 research institutes, and our research and policy recommendations are co-created with key stakeholders representing different sectors. So why am I, from a security-themed project here discussing sustainability today, is that those three are closely related. And furthermore, water, energy, and food are all at the heart of bioeconomy. Let's recap what we mean with resilience. From our perspective, we see it as a capacity and ability of socio-ecological systems that supports achieving sustainability and security. Along the same lines, the recent Arctic Resilience Report defines resilience as the capacity to buffer and adapt to stress and shocks, and thus navigate and even shape change. The Arctic Resilience Action Framework sees it as the ability of a system to bounce back and thrive during and after disturbances and shocks. And very importantly, resilience and climate adaptation are closely linked. Resilience is often divided to different phases or sectors within time when it comes to systems or actors' capabilities and abilities. Those range from planning and preparing to shocks, risks and stresses, to absorbing them, to recovering from them, and finally adapting to them. So what's the importance of water, energy, food nexus to resilience and sustainability then? We see it as a central approach of actually building sustainable and resilient societies. And as said, water, energy and food are at the very heart of bioeconomy. And when we are discussing nexus, we actually mean all sorts of linkages and interdependencies. Those may range from linkages between socioeconomic and biophysical systems. For example, very importantly, climate change is an excellent example of this, and ecosystems and their well-being are highly crucial for the development of the economy. Secondly, one needs to pay close attention to linkages between sectors within bioeconomy and also between bioeconomy and other sectors. And furthermore, for example, forestry, aquaculture, food production, bioenergy are all dependent on water and have impacts on watersheds and water resources. Third important linkages is between actors that have also been very much emphasized here. When creating new sustainable solutions, coming up with new ways of developing the bioeconomy, it's very important to pay attention to the needs and knowledge and capacities of all sorts of actors, ranging from indigenous and other local communities to public and private sector, and of course, research institutes. And Then there are very important linkages between geographical scales. This is very evident with transboundary phenomena such as climate change, but it also means that resilience needs to be built at multiple levels, ranging from local to global. Last but not least, when building resilient and sustainable systems, we need to pay close attention to linkages between time scales. So we have to keep in mind also the future impacts and past dependencies of our current actions. How to then build resilient and sustainable Arctic bioeconomy? Just to wrap up, some perspectives from our project's perspective. Firstly, there are no one-size-fits-all solutions to resilience, no single models to it. And resilience is not always only conservative, but it can also be about innovation and bouncing forward while naturally preserving features that are considered most important. Secondly, as emphasized, we need a systemic understanding of the water, energy, food nexus and the sustainability and resilience linkages in it at multiple levels, from past to the future. And last but not least, multi-stakeholder interaction and co-creation are the key ways of building sustainable and resilient futures. And those approaches can span from bottom-up and top-down. And in our project, we have, for example, found future scenarios a very good way of bringing together stakeholders from varied backgrounds to together find steps to sustainable and desired future. These are my very quick insights at this stage. I'm very much looking forward to further presentations and discussions. Thank you.
Suvi, thank you very much indeed. I think that all of us, at least I have learned a lot. And number one is really that it is such a complex area that we need the scientists to help us with that, because you made it sound like, you know, that everything is linked to everything, and that is something that is really, you know, a horizontal area for research nationally and globally as well. So thank you very much indeed, and I'm sure that link to energy, food and water and how they are linked to each other, we will come back to that today, and we have to come back to that later. I think, Ivonne, that is indeed a crucial thing for all of us. But let's go on, and I have the pleasure now to ask Pentti Hyttinen to take the floor, our Director General of Metsähallitus, the Finnish State Forest Enterprise. And we Finns, we know that Pentti has worked also as the region mayor in North Karelia, and also in the forest sector he has been working for European Commission for many years. So now the podium is yours, please.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell the aspects of multi-purpose forest management in terms of sustainable development and resilience as part of bioeconomy. So, first of all, to be able to practice sustainable forestry in the Arctic, we have to be aware of some key principles. First of all, we have to understand the biological processes. These things listed here are all related to the nature. We have to take all of those carefully into account when practicing forestry. A good information basis is the prerequisite for good forest management, and this is, let's say, the starting point in our work. Then comes the economy. Often it goes hand in hand with biological factors but not always. So in this sense, we have to take the full benefit of the scarce natural resources. It's a term called eco-efficiency or resource efficiency we follow here. For example, different parts of each tree, they must go for different purposes to be profitable enough to optimize the economic result of forest management. And this all, of course, how we manage forests, how we take the benefits, it depends on the demand of global market. And it's in principle, it is a market question. What type of things we get out from trees, what type of things we get out from our forests. Then, after biology and economy comes technology. An important tool in sustainable forest management, it's geographic information systems. It has various layers of information on different types of factors, and as we in Metsähallitus, it's one of our key strategic goals to maintain the level of biodiversity or even increase the level of biodiversity. It's important to have all the information having an impact on biodiversity, and to manage this information we need technique, we need technological systems and help. So we have the knowledge on biological processes, we have then the data collected on these various factors we have to take into account. Then the other part of technology is, of course, the optimal use of machinery in forests, and also the optimal use of information and communication. And with modern information and communication technology, we can optimize sales of different products, we can optimize the harvesting and transportation measures. And especially now when the forest resources are increasing here in Lapland, it's very important to find the best ways to operate with these information technology systems. And we are trying to be very active in developing modern tools. For example, at the moment we are exploring the possibilities of 3D modeling, planning, virtual reality things to be adopted in participatory planning, so that people can see how forest looks after thinning, after harvesting, and how it looks after 10 or 20 years after harvesting. So this is something we really want to be ahead of others and ahead of our competitors. So finally, it's the overall society. Sustainable and resilient forestry is more about people rather than trees. We have to combine the various needs of the society, and it is very essential to take all aspects of, for example, the Sami culture into account when practicing forestry in the north. We have to take and pay attention to reindeer herding, tourism, and other sources of livelihood in these areas. And in all our work, we have to take the local people with us, to discuss with local people, and listen to the opinion of public. And the tool for this work is the resource planning system, public participation methods we have adopted, and we try to develop these methods all the time. So whatever we do, we must be acceptable. Our work has to be accepted by the local people. We have to have the social acceptability. We have to have the license to operate here in the north. So this was my introduction. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Pentti. Indeed, I think that for us here in Finland, we are all very much aware of the role of Metsähallitus and the crucial importance of the cooperation with the local actors. And I'm sure we will come back to that also with the commentary talk as well. And I think that especially I want to emphasize it linked to our conference when we are talking about the Arctic area. That is what we are all aware. But I also want to emphasize and say my sincere thanks to you that you started your talk about the crucial need for accurate data. That is coming, of course, from the scientific point of view, but I think that more and more today we need it for the policy making everywhere, both nationally and globally. And there we have something important also for your organization to take care of also in the future. But about combining the different duties, we will come back to that later on. But thank you very much indeed, Pentti. And we go on then to our Natural Resource Institute of Finland and to Virpi Alenius, working in regional development. And I think that I'm pretty sure that you will also tell how your quite new research institute is very intensively collaborating with entrepreneurs, but also with other research and innovation organizations, and how it is linked to the bioeconomy challenges and the Arctic region is of great interest. So Virpi, please take the floor.
Thank you. Chair, ladies and gentlemen. Northern Finland is like a research laboratory or platform where the sparsely populated area lies in taiga. Here business consists only few big actors, but a lot of micro-entrepreneurs. Mostly gross domestic product comes from business based on natural resources. There are multiple users of natural resources like forestry, reindeer herding, tourism, fishing, mines, Sami people, and in Finland we have so-called everyone's rights to collect natural product from forest like mushroom and berries. The area-specific Arctic offers are nature, space, clean air and water, silence, renewable and mineral resources, nature-based activities, and plus of all of this we have here fluent network and good logistics. In Research Institute Luke, we do multidisciplinary research on Arctic like ecological, economic and social sustainable use of natural resources, resource smart planning and decision making, sustainable way of refining pure materials, logistics into markets with help of ICT. We also have platforms for testing and pilots and demos. Nowadays, the world is about working in nets, and partners can be from anywhere. Parents Area Partnership has long history. Good relationship is making the area as wanted Arctic partner in the Europe. Researchers must keep up dialogue between actors in the Arctic and decision makers in the capital of each Barents area country, but necessarily directly with decision makers in Brussels. Arctic is the whole Europe business. In the Arctic, Barents area has very active business because of northern sea route and also area's material resources. Business and sustainable use of resources need smartness and know-how in the area. To keep livelihood in sparsely populated area, we need, beside the entrepreneurs, also partnership, connection, and research and education. Partnership is collaboration in business and in development is critical. Nowadays, organizations and business are taking part on clusters and networking in the area. Smart specializing and partnership in local and global ecosystems within bioeconomy create a trustful and innovative atmosphere where the successful stories can take place. Connections, ICT and logistics. The world gets smaller every day, and interaction are possible with good connections. Research and education. Research institutes and universities, the local knowledge, educated people and innovative research makes new development possible. Now, this is deep in the box, and it is simplification into theoretical approach. In sustainable economy, the social and economic and ecological optimized sustainability level is not stable, and researchers must make this system dynamics and related resilience visible to decision makers. We can optimize the overall sustainability and investigate the resilience. How fast the new optimum of overall sustainability is achieved when something changes, like climate change, new actor is coming into the market, or inhabitant increases, and so on. Sustainable usability of ecosystem services provide sustainable bioeconomy in the Arctic region as climate change continues. Research has also significant influence on bioeconomy through new innovations, through finding out the nature thresholds, values in dynamic system. We need partnership on different level to achieve overall understanding of sustainability within every aspect. Like Hyttinen said, that resilience is not about trees, it's about people. We need positive and constructive discussion in between forest management and reindeer herding, farming and reindeer herding, nature-based tourism and mining, nature-based recreation tourism as fishing and hunting, and aboriginal people. And also everyone's right in collecting natural products into commercial use and landowners. We can solve this land use contradictory interest via research, like what are the thresholds for nature resources, create more resilience in land use planning, and introduce research-based PPP model into Arctic, focusing the local and marketing activities. These all need processing of partnership. Lapland has been active and smart when building up Arctic smartness. There is partnership between business developer and developers organization in clusters. There are development environments cluster, design cluster, industry and circular economy cluster, smart rural community cluster and safety cluster. aim is to provide platform to developers and business to build partnership into Europe. These clusters include research and end users, so we are here ready to make sustainability into reality. Thank you.
Wow, Virpi, what a picture. You know, that's, I hope that all of us, we will remember and try to understand, you know, what is linked to what. But that was really, really amazing, and with the added value, I think, for all of us that we could find from the picture, indeed. And thinking about the Arctic area as a research laboratory is quite fascinating. Perhaps not everyone understands that in the same way. We go now there in Rovaniemi, and when we meet the first people and say it's nice to be here in the research laboratory, that you will get, you know, big applauses, but by explaining what it means, perhaps with the picture and so on. So it is very, very fascinating way to go ahead. And especially I think what I want to emphasize is what you nicely said, the importance of the local knowledge. That is very, very important. I'm sure most likely we will go back to that later on. And also the empowerment from collaboration. That goes back to what I said in the beginning, linked to the phrase of together. That is definitely something we need. Thank you very much, Virpi, for your talk. That was fascinating indeed. And then we go on to Mia Landauer, and she's a researcher in the Risk and Resilience Program and Arctic Futures Initiative. Quite complicated, you know, at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. But I'm sure that when you go back and talk about what is happening in Austria, you will tell a little bit more what this means. But definitely going into the topic of the research focus on climate change risks. And I'm now happy to give the floor to you, Mia, please.
So, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for coming to this session this morning, so early in the morning, and many thanks for the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry for inviting me here today. Our Risk and Resilience Program, as the name says, we are focusing very much on climate-related risk modeling, assessment, and also climate governance. And my role in this research is also to provide an Arctic perspective to the climate governance discussion. And what I'm presenting for you today is I'm going to talk about the role of the Arctic local communities and the vulnerable Arctic communities, and how that is also considered in the global international climate policies. Excuse me. Thank you. So yes, so let's move on. So what's going on in the Arctic? We all know that there is a rapid climate change going on, and systems in the Arctic are reaching tipping points, and not only large systems but also smaller systems, for example traditional fisheries, social ecological systems such as traditional fisheries or reindeer husbandry. And here we can see some of the consequences of climate change that are already visible in the Arctic. Coastal areas, slow onset events such as sea level rise, but also rapid changes, rapid impacts and storm surges, for example, and then coastal erosion, which can be seen here in this picture. And then on top of that, we also have kind of the indirect risks. and impacts that are coming from the economic development and the land use change that is going on in the Arctic. So that altogether creates systemic risks, and systemic risks are characterized by high uncertainty, and they are more difficult to evaluate, calculate. Risk probabilities are not easy to calculate about systemic risks. And here we can see some pictures what is going on in the Arctic. So we have industrial development, infrastructure related to that. We have forestry, we have other mining projects going on, and all these things affect the local communities, and that also brings in the discussion how is the distribution of these risks, and what are the possibilities to adapt to these, because that varies a lot across the Arctic region. And this raises questions on the responsibilities, liability, and also equity. So who bears the costs of this change, who gains benefits of this change, and so on. So let me show you this busy slide. So as I already said, we have on the left side the climate change impacts, and then also these indirect impacts of the economic development related to the better access to these certain Arctic regions to extract resources, for example. And then we have the natural variability of climate. In the middle, we have the Arctic communities. They are within the institutional and jurisdictional framework, and socio-economic, cultural and political settings within these. They are trying to engage in adaptation, trying to cope with these changes, and these communities, of course, also have different needs and different perceptions, also risk perceptions, and different values. And when we think about the limits to adaptation, or here we point out to this adaptation threshold. So that is depending on whether for example, a social ecological system is able to adapt to this change through, for example, community-based adaptation, participatory planning, and also self-governance. But then whether this system is facing losses and damages through these impacts on their culture, on their livelihoods, and also on the infrastructure that is very expensive to rebuild in the Arctic, and then of course also health impacts. So it's actually this is a system as itself, because there are so many things you have to think about when also looking at these Arctic communities and how they kind of operate. So what have we learned? Well, based on our studies so far, we have learned that we need new policy instruments. We need governance mechanisms that can tackle these complex systems, these complex problems that the Arctic is facing. And from time to time, we do have good instruments as well. We have innovations, we have different kinds of soft and hard steering mechanisms to deal with this, but these should be also revisited from time to time, because we are not necessarily sure that they are actually the ones that are needed, because you know the Arctic is going through a transformation and things are changing all the time. And then what I would like to point out here, that also across multiple scales of governance, so not only hierarchy from top down, or not only local actions, but something in between. And here the sustainable transformation, I believe, can only happen if we have participatory approaches to tackle with this change. And so participatory environmental governance is very important here. And this Arctic study that I'm doing at the ASA is, we wrote a chapter to this book. I would like to advertise this a bit. This is a Springer book that will be coming out early next year, I hope. It will be open access. So if you have interest, you can have a look at it. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. And you can find my email address here or just look at our webpage. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mia, very much indeed. You challenge all of us by asking that are we really using the right instruments, are we really using the right mechanisms, and I'm sure that what you concluded as the participatory governance for environmental issues and more horizontally even is a crucial thing, not to underestimate the need for risk assessment, both the direct and indirect risks for both adaptation, but especially, of course, for prevention. That is very, very crucial for all of us. Okay, now we heard all the guest speakers, but before we go to specific questions we have asked beforehand or commentary talk, and I'm very pleased that now we have a local key player here from Rovaniemi, Hannu Ylinenpää, who is the Director of Marketing and Innovations of the Lapset Group Ltd. Here in Rovaniemi, a very well-known family-based and family-owned company, not only here in Finland but globally, for manufacturing playgrounds and sports equipment. So, what do you think about our presentations, and how do you see it from the company's point of view? I'm very, very happy that you took your time to be with us today. Please.
Okay, thank you. Lapset company values. Growth is our passion, success is our pleasure, and we respect and motivate people. And the fourth one, sustainability is our DNA. Mm-hmm. These values have been our cornerstone since early 90s. And in a competitive global business where price is nowadays the most critical buying criteria, you need to have a strong mind and believe yourself that you don't change your values, how you have operated in the past and how you are planning to do also in the future. It has not been an easy task, but when you are patient enough and keep up what you are stating and how you are working, it brings hopefully a positive feedback in the future. As an example, our two biggest competitors from Denmark and Sweden have during the last 2 years moved their factories in Eastern Europe. And they have used pretty much the same argumentation what we are still using today. And I kind of wonder about how their customers are changing how they are seeing these companies in the future. Sometimes it has been frustrating to do that. You need to kind of promote what we do here in Lapland and Finland in our forest industry, when some of our competitors are stating that what would be a good material for example, for playgrounds. And this is more the question about using wooden components against metal components. So we as a company, even we are very big in our own industry, we are still nobody in the worldwide business. So taking your own resources, lobbying, for example, our certificate forest against other certification which is more well known in the worldwide. For us, it's anyway important that locally we have also forest industry nearby, because the raw materials what we are using have to be nearby. In the recent years, I'm also wondering that are we promoting our products and how much we are also promoting our philosophy to our customers. Luckily, we have over 50 sales partners in worldwide who are also able to use our materials, what we are using in today's social media. And the social media is also helping in a local company like us to present our message and our argumentation to our customers. Arctic environment has a very positive image. That is one reason why we are bringing our customers during winter time and really hoping that we will have at -20 centigrade, that we are able to give a unique experience. But also on the other hand, we need to also prove that working and doing business in Arctic climate is also sustainability, and that has also taken, let's say, lots of our time and resources. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Hannu. Indeed, I can understand, and I think all of us, we can understand the basic challenge you mentioned, wood versus other materials, and then the location of the company, and the role of the certification is only one element in the big picture. But isn't it quite nice what you said? Sustainability is the DNA of the company. Not bad in my opinion from the PR point of view. I'm sure somebody's copying it already if they haven't done it so far. So unfortunately our second or the other commenter, Miss Katja Missikangas, is sick today, so she cannot be here to talk about one other aspect of the bioeconomy which has not been touched so much today, meaning food, and the 100% natural superfoods as her company advertises from the Arctic warriors point of view. But I think that during the conference time we have enjoyed the hospitality also linked to the local food very well indeed, so that is covered, and perhaps there are questions linked to that or comments linked to that area from the audience, which are more than welcomed. So we have now time enough for questions and discussions, and to wake the audience up, I have first round to the experts here around me, and that would be a more practical one linked to your presentations as well, simply to say how to improve the sustainability of bioeconomy here in the Arctic area, based on your own experience, based on the lessons learned. How to do that? Pentti, I'm challenging you first. What would you say based on your very broad experience, of course, from Metsähallitus, which is very important for our whole nation, but not only for Finland, but I think for as part of the Arctic region, indeed.
Thank you. It's many aspects related to that. One is, of course, that we should have the information and data available, and I think this is not a problem anymore, and it's not been a problem for a long time the timber resources as such. So we have timber, enough timber is growing faster than ever. That's something we can handle. But what is now needed is we should know more about how we can practice climate-friendly forestry, so that we don't know all the parameters. We have pieces of information, pieces of scientific knowledge from there and there, but we don't have the full picture how we could practice forestry so that it is doing the best for the climate.
Okay. Yvonne, how do you see that from your work point of view and the history of your broad experience on Europe and perhaps even globally?
Well, one of the issues that have been raised over and over again is the lack of awareness of the value of natural capital. And I think this is one area where we need to develop more, where we have, it doesn't have to be in monetary terms, but that there's awareness that forests, that the ecosystem services have a value to them and have a value for all people. And without this knowledge, for example, even when we talk about economy, we talk about GDP, we don't take into account natural resources, the natural capital in those calculations. More and more this is happening now in the United Nations. We're developing these natural accounts, but I think there's still lack of knowledge of this. These are not free. These are not free services. These have a cost, and we need to be able to raise awareness about this, about the value of this natural capital. And secondly, as I think everybody has said here, we have to ensure that people are at the center, that we are taking into account the needs of the local communities, of the indigenous people. We have to involve them in our discussions. It cannot be without them. I really liked what yesterday, I think she's the head of the president of the Sami parliament, she said, nothing about us without us, or when you're discussing us, we need to be a part of it. I'm paraphrasing, but I think that to me really resonated, that we cannot take decisions from it has to work. Of course, there's governance at the top, but it has to come down to needs of local communities. And finally, I would say also priorities. That yesterday we also spoke about funding and the need for funding. And while this may be true in many areas, I think sometimes it's about priorities of the governments, making them aware that instead of investing in some areas which may not be thinking of sustainable development, thinking of the future generations, and then moving those resources, investments to another place. And I think that really we have to raise awareness with the politicians, with those decision makers, that money sometimes is available, but you're putting it in the wrong place. Mm-hmm. So I think that also will help with a more sustainable bioeconomy, especially in the Arctic. Let's put our resources where they need to be put.
And I think that for that you really need this kind of a discussion for the Arctic region as a whole, because of course nations are comparing each other for sure, and they should, especially in this topic, they should, when talking about the priorities and even the level of understanding for decision making. So indeed, but it is nice when you say it's not only about money and funding as such, you know, it's much more complicated. Even that is much more complicated as everything as we go. When I'm going back to you with your nexus, you know, that everything is linked to each other. What about you, Mia?
I completely agree, and you mentioned the need, the word need, and I wanted to point out that when considering any infrastructure projects or anything that affects, for example, the land use of traditional livelihoods in the Arctic region also, it's important to be aware that the local need can be very different from the national need, for example. So this should be kept in mind when implementing any project. So if it's considered beneficial on a national level, it doesn't mean that it's so also in the local level. And then in terms of risks and costs and benefits, this varies a lot when you look at the national level and you look at the local level. So I think that's important. But then, of course, we need this systems thinking. I mean, I say that because I'm from IASA and we do a lot of systems analysis, but it is important to be able to get the holistic picture. You need to look at several sectors, the bigger system, and not just one single system, because you don't get the big picture if you are doing it in silos. And and we have these emerging risks due to this global climate change, but also rapid economic development. So we need to know more about these emerging risks. What's going to happen, and how to deal with it, and as I already mentioned during my presentation, who is responsible for that change and for those impacts that might be negative as well.
Yes. And in the end, we see the responsibilities when we look in the mirror. We are all responsible. That's why we are here. So Virpi, what are your lessons learned?
Firstly, I think that to understand diversity here in Arctic, diversity in nature resources, natural resources, and the bioeconomy is now not only in Arctic but in sparsely populated areas thing to work on. And I think that self-efficacy is that stopping the natural resource flow away there, but you have to Arctic communities increase the know-how how to refine natural products themselves and then bring them to market. And I think that these are know-how and self-key and diversity understanding. These are the key issues.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Nicely phrased. Suvi.
Well, one needs to have the complex and potentially puzzling big picture in mind and think about the all different linkages. But when we are bringing the solutions into practice and trying to implement things, I think we essentially need two things. We need good targets, science-based targets, but also targets that are co-created and that people have ownership of. And then we have good process, and that process means good legislation policies, but it also means very sort of hands-on, local co-creation, multi-stakeholder collaboration, and that's not always easy. And in there, it's quite important that you have good facilitators for the process as well. That's something that's not always sort of maybe thought of or emphasized, that the co-creation doesn't happen by itself, but there needs to be parties that stakeholders trust who are supporting the process and giving the space to all perspectives as well.
Okay, audience, I give the opportunities if any one of you is really looking forward to get the floor to raise any questions. It's now a real possibility to ask wonderful experts to reply if any of you want to raise any. I have several questions in my mind, so don't worry, there will be questions ahead. But any from you two want to raise any questions? There is one gentleman. I'm happy for your courage. Please introduce yourself and say if it's a specific question to anyone in here sitting. Please.
Yes, Adam Stempin from Arctic Center, University of Lapland. Thank you for a very nice panel. A lot of you, and I think I'm kind of following up on the last sentences that Suvi said. A lot of you mentioned the need for participatory governance, for consultations, for involvement, and that's all well and good. But when you think about Arctic context, when you think in the context of sparsely populated areas, we are talking about actors with very low capacities, very often small organizations, small peoples. We are talking about small companies that don't have time to take part in 3 billion of consultations and participatory governance engagements. Would you be able able to kind of highlight some good practices, some good experiences that you had in your projects, from your companies, or from your encounters, that could be highlighted here as in the context of bioeconomy, in the context of, for example, forestry management. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very much close to the next question that I was going to raise. Thank you for that. Anyone volunteering? Yes, Virpi, you will start, and then Pentti to continue.
I think that the small companies or one-man companies or one-man business, I think that we should increase the know-how that they are in. They don't must have to produce the product themselves in the end, from the first, the value chain, all the end, the product for the end users. But they can be, in a value chain, one part of it, and increase that know-how that natural resources are so-called refining and increasing the value every phase of the chain. So they can be one part of the chain and not all the producing chain. If you, you understand.
Yes, I think that is a challenge in this country, at least, you know, and that is linked to the cooperation, and that is linked to the advice giving and so on, when we are talking about the whole value chain. I'm sure, Jaana, you could give a good example, you know, from the beginning of your company, the story, how it started and so on, not to do everything yourselves either. But if you want to comment later on, I'm happy to give the floor. But Pentti, you are the next one, then Mia. Yeah,
thank you. So in Metsähallitus, we really share this concern. It is important in our work, and we have been developing systematic methods for natural resource planning, so that we try to involve all the interest groups and all the people. And the groups, they differ a lot. There are noisy groups. There is no problem to get their opinions, but then there are quiet groups, small groups, and it is very difficult to get their opinion in the discussion. And the modern technology, I think it helps in some sense, that we have the internet, at least it is one option to give feedback and give the contribution. So I think this is there's no one solution. It is a group of different media, different ways to come and give the opinion.
That's true. Mia.
I think I can give you a very practical example based on my own experiences, how to deal with different types of stakeholders and trying to engage them to get, of course, data for our research. And one example is how to get enough information about this specific stakeholder group. For example, I was interviewing reindeer herders in Finland, and I had to start planning the whole process very early, because first of all I had to learn how the herders operate, what are their management practices, when are they there, because it doesn't make sense to contact them if they are gone, you know, if they are in the field, they are not answering my emails or phone or anything. And the same goes with, of course, government authorities as well, when they are organizing public hearings, for example, within the environmental impact assessment procedure. These public hearings should be organized in a time that you know that your focus group is able to come there. But of course, I mean, you have to kind of, as a researcher as well, you have to be able to sell your kind of product to make them interested, because I understand your point, what you just said, that they might not have time or even interest to participate, but you have to make sure that they become interested. And then you just basically have to take the phone and contact them. That's the only way, and that's also to build trust, because trust is very important here.
That is crucial, yes. Yvonne, you wanted to comment as well?
Yes, just to say, of course, we work at the regional level, so it's a little bit different. We don't work at the national level, but we have representation through associations, and those who are interested in participating in the process are contacted, are part of our group with whom we work. So we give them information. It takes time too, because then they have to go back to their membership to be able to collect their views to bring it back to the table. So you have to take into account time that it takes for all the discussion to go on when you have representatives. But the best way we work is with representation. It would be impossible to reach out to everyone when we're working, especially when you're working at the regional level.
That's quite clear. Yeah, Suvi, you wanted to say as well?
I could also add that, especially when there are like big sort of power imbalances or differences in capacity between different stakeholder groups, it might be good to first have sort of like safe spaces for them to form their perspective among themselves before bringing all to the same floor, where it easily gets sort of like imbalanced who actually has access, who has a voice, so that those sort of like forums and areas, like spaces for co-creation, are created in that way as well.
Hannu, you want to say from the real practical point of view?
Well, we have always think about that act locally, think globally. Usually if you have a one-man show, you have a good product idea. To take that big leap and go in a global market, sometimes it is very risky if you don't get any support, either your partner network or investors. So sometimes it makes sense that you try first locally, but you need to have a plan that when it works locally, you can also then get into a global business. And thanks to internet, even you are a small company, you are visible worldwide when you do a proper communication. And that helps. And if you go back on the 80s and 90s, you needed to build up your sales network. Without that, you were no one, and your customers were not able to find you. But today, it's, let's say, easier. But then again, it's also important that you focus where you are very good at.
So our time is about over, and I know that my boss is coming here to say, Jaana, go away. But I use the opportunity for very short summary of each of the great panelists, because as I started the whole discussion about the 100 years anniversary and together, and we have been talking a lot about the importance of the collaboration in the Arctic area. So very briefly from all of you, how would you reflect the urgent need for collaboration linked to sustainability in the Arctic region? Pentti.
Well, I think it is very important for all the stakeholders to remember that it's always better to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So this attitude you should always have.
That is great. Well said. Okay, Ivonne, do it even better.
Well, we have been successful through regional cooperation. We wouldn't have been able to succeed in the work that we do without all the involvement of the member states and other stakeholders with their expertise. Everybody has a strength, and we need to build upon those strengths and bring those strengths together in that cooperation. So I would say working together, focusing on the strengths of the different stakeholders and bring them to the table.
Okay, nicely said as well. Mia?
I think because I've been talking about climate change so much, I think I forgot to mention, and it's a very important thing, that in these international climate negotiations, we should try to raise the Arctic issues much more than what we can see right now. For example, the loss and damage mechanism. It's focusing on developing countries, and of course it's very important to think about the vulnerable developing countries, but we should also think about, and somebody actually mentioned it yesterday in a session, that although we are kind of rich countries within the Arctic region, but it doesn't mean that everybody has the access to resources or the access to decision making. Everybody has the decision making power to influence the decision making, to influence the, for example, international climate policy. So I would like to see much more. Maybe Arctic Council could do more about raising the Arctic issues in the international area.
Okay, you throw the ball forward. That's nice. Very well taken, Virpi.
So I think that bioeconomy has to be integrated into the circular economy in order to be sustainable. And this needs partnership, whatever, very much. And I think that resilience is about partnerships.
That's nicely said as well. And Suvi?
I'd like to encourage all the researchers to engage more also outside academia, and that's not only because we can bring our results to practice, we can learn more, but I think we can also act as facilitators in processes that are creating resilience and sustainability.
Thank you very much indeed. And what I want to say as a conclusion, everything starts and everything is linked to each other, and everything starts from all of us, from our attitudes. That's number one, and it has been wonderful time. I could have continued, for the next hour with you, because I had so many questions in my mind, but we can continue that during the short break before the next session. But as an advertisement to all of you, the very first Arctic Resilience Forum will be here in Rovaniemi next year in September, and that is part of the implementation of the Arctic Resilience Framework during this chairmanship of Finland in the Arctic Council, and so I'm very happy and proud that we can continue that also next year as part of the demanding job of the Council, which Finland is of course very, very proud of. Let's give a big applause to our wonderful panelists.